Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 88 of Sports Speak. Hope you're doing well. I'm Eddie Pileggi.
I'm Tim Moore.
We got Drew Jua back here again, and it's a perfect time because the 2022 NASCAR season set to officially begin this weekend, just 3 days away from the Daytona 500, the Great American Race. We'll be doing our picks at the end, and just a quick plug once again, we're going to be doing a NASCAR pick'em, Tim and I. You can follow along on our Twitter at SportsSpeak Live throughout the season to see who we pick. Both of us did pretty bad with the clash, especially me because Alex Bowman did not even make it into the main event. So we'll see what happens with our picks later in the show. But let's start right off with Daytona 500 qualifying because it seems like Hendrick Motorsports has the speed once again. Kyle Larson picking up right where he left off, the defending champion, who's never actually been that good at the plate tracks, is on the pole. Alex Bowman on the front row yet again for the Daytona 500. Eric Almirola, the only non-Hendrick car, qualifying in the top 5 ahead of tonight's duels. I'll go to Tim first. Do you think Hendrick Motorsports really has a beat on this next-gen car, or is it a little too early to tell just because of their super speedway qualifying? This is just the same as any other year.
I'm going to be honest, absolutely not. If I'm going to be honest, Hendrick's involvement, during the next-gen testing and so on, I'm not saying that the next-gen testing is exact, how do I put a definition of how things are going to start off, but, Hendrick has been very good. Very, very good, coming in qualifying and so on. Of course, Alex Bowman, fifth consecutive year starting on the front row, record breaking. Kyle Larson finally getting his first career Daytona 500 pole and still looking for what might I add, what should be his first potential top 5 in Daytona 500. Of course, you think about what was it, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, the race that Kurt Busch won back when it was the Monster Energy Cup Series and Larson was leading late and ran out of fuel and so on. And you look at that maybe as what would have been his best 500. But when I look at for Hendrick, I'm going to be utterly honest. Yes, you have 2 cars on the front row. It's great. But there's 2 things that I have a major, major concern for. And I don't want to jump topics to what we're going to talk about in a little bit, but I do want to start off with this. We've seen in the past, and I think about an era specifically for Hendrick Motorsports around the time when Chase Elliott was a rookie, where these cars are very similar. Not that there's an aero bubble and so on, but what I mean is Hendrick could have a lot of speed, but the unpredictability of cutting lanes and having a lot more stiff of a race car could create the opportunity where the rear end's going to come out a lot more easier. And the reason why I remember that is if you remember, back in Chase Elliott's rookie year, you had Dale Earnhardt Jr. from the lead, wrecked by himself in wipeout cars. You had Chase Elliott, who was on the pole, wrecked from the lead in the first, I think it was like 20 laps of the race and nailed the pit wall on his rookie campaign, did not start off great. I would not be surprised if a Hendrick car goes sliding off the banking. Of course, I know these cars have a lot more grip, but it is still very easy for these cars to step out. And the big thing too, Hendrick Motorsports, very much focused on individual running. And I want to point that out more importantly. They didn't practice in big packs like other teams did. They specifically focused on solo car speed, individuality, which means their first real test outside of course, the next gen testing, but their first real test of in-race pack racing setup is going to come tonight. But I also want to mention my final concern, which is really the biggest concern, because there's one thing that we cannot forget about, not just for Hendrick, but other teams. Hendrick Motorsports did not bring a backup car to Daytona. RCR, as well as I believe it's Stuart Haas Racing, 3 of the biggest teams notable for not bringing backup cars because of the part shortage, and that they feel that they won't be able to get cars ready for the West Coast run that they're going to have starting next week, starting with Auto Club. And I think that's really, really important because when we look at it tonight, I feel like there's going to be a team, for the record, I'm not saying it's Hendrick, but it's going to be one of those 3 teams that is going to face a barrier that they're going to probably have to go to a backup car. Maybe it's not a crash, maybe it's a blown engine or so on. But the point is, at some point this weekend, I think one of those 3 teams are going to see a barrier. And I think that I'm very eager to see how teams approach it. Because if I'm going to be honest tonight, I know obviously the two guys in the front row, Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson. Bowman plays a strategy every year where he just drops to the back and tries to become irrelevant. And might I add, he nearly crashes in the duels every year while still running for last. But the point is that I truthfully don't believe we are going to see any of these teams. Maybe Stewart-Haas Racing, because let's be honest, Derek Almirola likes being aggressive. But I really don't know if I will see any of these teams push the envelope or race around the front, throughout the majority of these dual races. Because the fact of the matter is, if you crash one, maybe more cars, there is no way these teams can prepare a car in time for the Daytona 500 on Sunday, considering they still have to bring down another car from Charlotte, get it set up, and none of those cars are prepared for super speedway racing. I think that's going to play a big factor into tonight's story. And I'm going to be honest, very well could decrease the quality of the racing with that being present, because a lot of teams are going to be playing worried, and they're not the only three. They're just the most notable ones.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, it's not as big of a deal at least from what I've read with this generation of car. Like if there's a car set for like a mile and a half or like Auto Club to transition it to a super speedway car, there's not as many differences. Now with the next gen, it's kind of a one size fits all kind of deal. Still, it's difficult with logistics with cars in North Carolina that are being saved in the whole parts shortage thing. So Drew, I'll go to you. I mean, from what we're looking at heading into the dual races, do you think we're going to see a lot of these teams be more conservative and not want to risk anything? Do you think we're going to see a lot of training here over the dual races and maybe even into the Daytona 500 as well, just because of this part shortage, kind of similar to 2013 when the Gen 6 was brand new?
Yeah, I believe, which what Tim was saying, the Hendrick cars not really practice in groups, so it's gonna make life difficult for them to going in the 500. I mean, they're going to have to decide to either, practice in the duels, because like Tim said, both Larson and Bowman will both be kind of cautious because they qualified in the front row. They're going to have that spot. They don't want to risk getting damaged in that race. So they're just going to sit back, but it's difficult for the Hendrick cars, especially because they haven't really been practicing with their teammates. They're going to have to kind of learn how their car runs in the pack. It's just going to, with Hendrick, Stewart-Haas, and RCR, they're all going to be more conservative. It's going to make the racing a little worse because, I mean, they don't have backup cars. It's going to be interesting to see how different teams handle tonight.
So let's talk about the open cars now. Now, Jacques Villeneuve has made it into the Daytona 500. Big surprise, brand new team. Attempted to make the 500 like 15 years ago, didn't get in that time, but he gets in on speed. So does Noah Gragson. Gragson, not a huge surprise, was a favorite to make it last season before getting taken out in a crash caused by an MBM car. And oh, by the way, there's two MBM cars trying to get in tonight. And we talked about aggressive drivers and potentially causing accidents tonight. Garrett Smithley's not running one of their cars like last year, but that doesn't mean that Timmy Hill or JJ Ailey won't get a little aggressive and could potentially cause a big accident tonight trying to get into the 500, because just looking at the speeds, at least, it seems like Greg Biffle and Kaz Grala have faster cars than the MBM cars so far through the first couple of days. But Tim, looking at these open cars heading into tonight, who are you looking at? Do you think Greg Biffle could possibly get in? And then as a side note, seeing Biffle coming back, seeing Villeneuve coming back, I think this is kind of good for the sport. There are drivers now willing to get involved with next gen. Of course, Tony Stewart getting involved in the broadcast booth, not on the track, but he's been one of the people that has, said a lot of negative things about NASCAR in the past. And the fact that he's been willing to get involved in the sport in some way, I think is a good sign. And, I'm not saying bringing Derek Cope back, because we know what happened there when we brought him on the track. But, if you're bringing veteran drivers, I think it can get some of the older fans back interested, seeing some familiar faces on track. And I think it really sets up NASCAR in a good position going forwards to see some, sort of legends and past faces coming back to the sport to try out this next gen thing for themselves.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing too that it really emphasizes is diversity. I mean, when you think about Jacques Villeneuve and him coming through NASCAR in the system when he's come over, and of course, I mean the championships, between IndyCar and Formula One and so on, and road racing in general, that's where you think of him of being dominant. Of course, I know his NASCAR transition hasn't utilized many ovals, but the fact that you can think about someone that's been as successful as Jacques Villeneuve has a chance to compete for a Daytona 500 to me is heartwarming because we just know how do I put it? How historic his career has been. And if you don't follow him, it's, in my opinion, very comparable, maybe to a lesser extent, but very comparable to a journey of Juan Pablo Montoya. Of course, we're not talking about a full-time ride and so on, but my point is that, he's won a lot of these big races and it's gone very, how do I put it? It's gone very, very under the radar. Yet here we are, someone that's might add, I mean, he's not going to have a full-time career anytime soon, in NASCAR at least, but wanting to be a part, it creates diversity. Of course, look at it in terms of team ownership. A lot of minority individuals getting involved in the sport, trying to own teams or trying to make things involved. And to me, that's the greatest part about NASCAR these past 2-3 years. Rather you sit on whatever side after what happened with the Bubba Wallace situation, I really think that opened up the door for NASCAR. The fact that, yes, I know there's part shortage, but the fact that it's more easier available for teams to want to be involved, I think that's great. Floyd Mayweather, his team, obviously with Kaz Grala, I'm eager to see what Kaz does tonight. There's a lot of potential there. Obviously, I think everyone's pulling for the Biff to make the 500. I mean, let's be honest. The Biff came off a yacht 2 days ago, says, hey, I'm gonna come race late transition. I wish it was in a 69 car, but I'll settle with the 44. And I really think that I agree. It's gonna bring back old people that remember, and a lot of it too is, hey, I don't want this to stop with just Craig Biffle. I would love to see more involvement, from maybe mid 2000s guys. Like, hey, I'm telling you right now, everyone would tune in to come see Jimmy Johnson come back and race in the Daytona 500, even if it was a one-off. Of course, we know the rumored double, the Coke 600 and the Indy 500 for Jimmy Johnson is still there potentially. But the idea of that is thrilling. I'd even think NASCAR would love to see Tony Stewart come back for a race. Even, Jeff Gordon, like legends and icons. And I know the Biff doesn't fall under that category, but the Biff is someone that's had a compelling career. And of course, I know as well, if you want eyes to tune in, if NASCAR could find a way to get Carl Edwards back in the car, I mean, let's be honest. Everyone would want to see Carl Edwards back in the car. Now, is that going to happen? Probably not. But the point is that this is the first step, in my opinion, of getting to that. And it's really good to see. And the fact that we're starting to see more foreign diversity and more involvement, and Villeneuve being an example, I think that's really, really good for the sport. And it's going to make the 500 special. And I just do want to finish on this point, too. You mentioned aggression. Aggression is going to be very, very, very focused with those guys who are not going to make it in. And the only thing that stinks about the duels, and I hate that they didn't change it from last year. You think about Ty Dillon, for example, who missed the Daytona 500 last year off a great result, but because he wasn't the best of the go-go homers and he didn't qualify well, and but he had the best result of those that got eliminated, but the point is that because he didn't qualify well, not because of his performance on track, he didn't make the Daytona 500. And the fact that they've kept this system, and there's a fact that, let's say Greg Biffle finishes, behind Villeneuve or whatever. I actually haven't seen how the duels are broken down for tonight of which go homers are and what. I should probably look at that. But the point is that if you have a guy that's still racing their way in, their goal is to be number one. Because at the end of the day, especially if you're Team MBM, that you cannot, no matter what, you cannot rely on speed tonight. You cannot make it on speed. You were in the bottom two. So I expect aggression from those two drivers, in particular of JJ Yeley, as well as Timmy Hill. But most importantly, I expect there to be an aspect of cautiousness and defensiveness from those teams, that are right on the brink, because that you have nothing to lose, and those drivers are going to do whatever they can. And yeah, you get to see Noah Gragson, which might add to real heartwarming story after last year making the Daytona 500, as well as Villeneuve. But this is going to be the story of the night, in my opinion. And what these drivers will do to make the Daytona 500 is going to be interesting. I'm just interested to see how many crashes we see from teams that are not competing for a spot right now, because again, the part shortage and so on continues to remain my concern. I don't know if we're going to see teams even that have backup cars want to fully push the envelope, in a 60 lap dual race.
Yeah, and I don't want to harp too much on the duels, but just to set the stage with context a little bit, since you mentioned it, Duel 1, you've got JJ Yaley, Kaz Grala, and Noah Gragson of the open cars. And then Duel 2, which I think is going to be the more entertaining one, you've got Jacques Villeneuve, Greg Biffle, and Timmy Hill. I think overall, there's always one duel that ends up being the wreck fest, and the other one is usually pretty calm. I think Duel 2 is going to be the crazy one, because Duel 1, I was looking at the lineup earlier. 7 of the top 8 starters are Chevys. Plus, there's 2 Penske cars. There's 2 Stewart-Haas cars, in addition to 300 cars. That's 7 competitive guys that do not have backup cars at the track. So I think there's going to be a lot more training there. In that second race, you've got some aggressive drivers. You've got Bubba Wallace, you have Stenhouse, you have Logano, on top of the Biff and Timmy Hill and Jacques Villeneuve. So I think that could end up being the crazier of the 2 races, but it'll be fun. It's just exciting to see the cars backpack racing once again, especially now since the Clash is not done at Daytona. So this is the first time we really get to see pack racing this season. But let's move on and talk about the Great American Race on Sunday, the Daytona 500, 200 laps, 40 drivers going for it. Should be a fun one. Last season, the crazy ending, Michael McDowell getting the victory as Keselowski and Logano came together at the end. Drew, what are you looking for in this Daytona 500? What are you expecting? And in the end, who's your pick to win it all?
Yeah, I expect the first maybe 100 laps for people to, try and learn how the car is racing. They have the duels to lean off of, but I expect not too many aggressive moves, I would hope. I mean, there was a huge crash last Daytona race, and that kind of took out a decent amount of cars. Then what's it called? Then they had the little shorten, and we ended up racing in the night. So I expect people to kind of be gentle really early. I mean, I expect chaos is because it always comes around, but I expect somebody like Ross Chastain to be the causer of the big wreck early in the race if we have one. But I don't really know what to expect with this being the first next gen plate track. So I can't wait to witness it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun one for sure. In terms of my prediction, I think I agree with Drew. Now what we don't want to see is a wreck early, because the whole race got derailed last season when there was that 17 car pile up on just lap 14 of the race, all the way at the front of the field. And it kind of scared a lot of the drivers, and we saw a lot of training all the way literally until the final lap of the race after that. So I'd rather see the drivers be conservative early, and maybe if we get training in stage 1, that's one thing, but I just wanted to set up a fun stage 3 where drivers are willing to push their cars to the limits. I think we will see that. I think the drivers are going to start to learn with this draft package tonight in the duels what they can and cannot do, and where that line is and how they can cross it. But I think looking at the race, some people you got to watch out for. The Toyotas, I really think you can't count them out. I know the Chevys had speed in qualifying and the Fords worked good in practice, but the Toyotas have been at all these tests. JGR, aside from Martin Truex Jr., all of their guys were at the next gen test. Both Kurt Busch and Bubba Wallace got some time in the car as well. So between Kurt Busch, Bubba Wallace, Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Christopher Bell, Martin Truex Jr., you've got some really talented drivers. You've got Kurt Busch, a former 500 winner, Hamlin, who's won 3 of these races, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., both certainly due to finally carve their name onto Harley J. Earl Trophy. So for all of those reasons, I think it's going to be a Toyota that comes out of this with the win. And my bold prediction, I think to get the overall victory, I'm going to go with Kyle Busch. I think this is the year it's going to happen, especially since there's so much uncertainty for him next year because the Mars contract ends. M&M's will no longer be his primary sponsor next year. And you know that there's a lot of development drivers coming up in the Toyota racing development, especially Ty Gibbs. And if Ty Gibbs does as well in his full Xfinity season this year as he did last season, I mean, he might be ready for the Cup Series jump in 2023, which leaves Joe Gibbs with a question about how he's going to handle his race team. And Denny Hamlin's going to have financial backing. If Truex sticks around, he'll certainly have it. And Christopher Bell is new to the team. So then you wonder about Kyle Busch's future. So Kyle Busch doesn't really know what's going to be happening next year. I think this is the time to shine for him. And I think the 18 gets to victory lane in the Daytona 500. Tim, who's your pick to win it?
You know, I'm really tied because it's been a compelling story. Of course, it's dreaded years, just like it did for Tony Stewart. You know, Kyle Busch being there, being around, I wouldn't say so close the last few years because it feels like Kyle's always had a problem, not even out of his own doing. For example, back-to-back years of cutting down on a tire and so on, you know, in the 500, you know, to being there towards the end. And I really do think, for the record, too, and I do want to point this out, you expect Toyota dominance. I do expect Toyota dominance to an extent, but I don't expect them to maybe win the race. And the only reason why is this. Stewart-Haas, for example, major concern for me from that end. They did not participate in any of the next gen plate stuff that they did for the testing. I think that's big to note because just like Hendrick Motorsports, who didn't really do a lot of, you know, group draft practice, they're going to be basically going to this, as I like to say, cold turkey of, well, maybe we have it, maybe we don't. They're going to be doing obviously a lot of learning in the duels tonight, but then too, when they don't have backup cars, what are you going to do? You can't, you know, really test those lines. So I'm a little bit worried for Stewart-Haas in that regards, but I will say this, statistically speaking, I feel like the two drivers I think you have to look out for tonight and overall, and I guess the predictor that I will make, I'm going to say Ryan Blaney. He's done well plate tracks and so on, but you think about how close 2 years ago Ryan Blaney was, you know, to winning the Daytona 500. Had he not turned Ryan Newman, obviously Newman probably goes on to win that 500, but to lose it by a couple of yards to Denny, obviously he's learned from that experience a little bit. And I know, again, it's a brand new car, but he's done a really good job of plate tracks, being up there, leading laps and so on. And Penske, for the record, too, started off great. Obviously, the Coliseum's out of full tail, but Joey Logano, we know he's going to be aggressive. We know he's going to be blocking. And we can't also ignore the fact last year that had Michael McDowell maybe not shoved Joey Logano, obviously the fact of the matter is we would have been looking at Penske winning the Daytona 500 last year. So with that being said, I think Ryan Blaney wins this Daytona 500, but I do want to make note as well of a couple of the drivers. Obviously, mentioned Kyle Busch. There's going to be an urgency there. You can't ignore Denny Hamlin for a reason, or Martin Truex Jr. The Gibbs team is going to be very, very present at the end of the race, in my opinion, as well as Bubba Wallace and maybe Kurt Busch if he can stay out of trouble, you know, competing for a win. But the other person I want to mention that goes very under the radar, and I mentioned I truthfully don't think Hendrick has it fully figured out. Would I be surprised if Kyle Larson would have won a Daytona 500? Absolutely not. But I think the driver that everyone is underrating going into this 500 personally is Chase Elliott. I think that Chase Elliott has really turned it around in Daytona over the last 2 years. Last year, he finished second in the 500. And really over the last 5 races in Daytona, he's finished in the top 5 every single time. And when you think about statistics and surviving to the end, I know everyone has this impression of Chase of being over aggressive, but you have to understand that was 3-4 years ago to this point, and you can't really pin it on people for playoff races of being over aggressive, because that's its own monster. We've proven that at Talladega, where guys are on the edge and anyone will do anything to win at any time. And of course, points mean something at any time. But I think Chase Elliott, he looks the most balanced of the Hendrick cars from what I saw in qualifying as well as practice. take that as what you want, because of course I know he was the slowest of the cars, but I think that he has a very good chance if he can keep his nose clean of potentially winning. But for the moment, it's Ryan Blaney for me, but I would not be surprised if anyone who I said, or even Michael McDowell again, never know, could win another Daytona 500. But it's going to be a really good 500. You mentioned a big wreck as well. You know, if there's rain, I'm going to be honest, and probably will be rain. I know it says 6% chance, but that means 60 in Florida. You're probably going to see an early wreck if there's rain. I just truthfully think that's going to happen. But if there is not rain, I expect the first big crash to come at the end of stage one. I think you're going to see guys try to early on jump for points and test those boundaries in that first stage. You'll see stage two be very calm and maybe most to stage three, but I think you're going to see a little bit of an urgency in stage one that very much could cause problems like we've seen in most plate races. And of course, too, the good old green flag pit stop, if we do see it, that also could cause some harm as well.
All right, well, we'll see what happens in the Daytona 500. And one quick point I do want to refute, because you mentioned Chase Elliott being aggressive 3-4 years ago. I happen to remember the last time we were at Daytona, and I mean, this is not too long ago, because I was at Rutgers with Dan Buttafuoco looking on my phone when Chase Elliott and Matt DiBenedetto came together. So I don't think the aggression has necessarily gone away from Chase Elliott. That's not 4 years ago. That's just 6 months ago. But I will say he does have a good chance to win. He's one of the better plate drivers in this plate racers in the series. And of course, at Daytona, a lot of it is just all about survival and being there at the end. And, you know, there's certain random drivers that seem to always be able to survive. Denny Hamlin is one of them. Denny Hamlin didn't DNF at all last season. Michael McDowell's usually around. Chris Buescher is always around at the end. Corey LaJoie. It's just these certain guys that always seem to be able to make it through the big wrecks. But we'll see what happens. I think we'll definitely see a wreck at some point. But last segment, I know it's way too early, but we might as well. Our final four predictions preseason and who we got winning the championship. I'll get it started. Now, I love Martin Truex Jr. And Steve Letarte actually made a point that his big surprise this year is that Truex may not make the playoffs. And I think there's a possibility. Just, I don't know. He doesn't seem to have that same fire as he does in past years. I don't think he makes the playoffs or the final four. I don't think you can bet against Kyle Larson, so I put him in the final four right now. I think Denny Hamlin is going to have another really solid season in that 11 car, so I'll put him in the final four. Then beyond that, beyond those two is where it gets tough. I think someone who's going to have a huge year this year, and I think my big upset, one last resurgence in his career, and this is the big bold pick. I think Kurt Busch in the 45 makes the final four. I just like the move to 2311 racing for Kurt Busch. I think he's really emboldened and excited for one last opportunity in his career. And I think he's got to have a little added confidence to see that Kevin Harvick has been slipping and going very downhill. And Kurt Busch, on the other hand, has been staying afloat, and he's still getting that win every season. I think this is the year that he might put things together and have a big surprise. And my fourth driver in the final four, I got to put a Penske driver in there. I think Ryan Blaney is going to be the leader for Penske this year. Joey Logano is going to have a good year, but I think Blaney is going to have the better year. And my champion, I think Ryan Blaney is due. So I think Ryan Blaney is going to be Cup Series champion 2022, outlasts Hamlin, Kurt Busch, and Larson in the final four. Drew, I'll go to you for your final four and champion.
Before I make my final four pick, I want to solidify my Daytona 500 winner. I think someone who has been very solid at every plate track over the past few years is Chris Buescher. I feel like he's in the right place at the right time. I know, Eddie, you said that he would be up there, but I just like Chris Buescher. He's been solid every single season at these plate tracks, so I think he gets it done. And for my final four picks, I'm going to agree with three of your picks. I think Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin both get back to the final four. Ryan Blaney is up and coming. He had a great season, barely missed the final four, I believe. I can't really remember. And then for it's hard to pick the fourth person. There's so many solid. I want to pick another Joe Gibbs car, but I'll probably, it's either between Kyle Busch. I'll go Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch has been solid, and he's missed it just barely last couple of years. So I think he gets back. And for my champion, I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin, even though everybody likes to joke about how he always chokes it. But I don't know. I feel like this is his season. And if not, it'll probably be Kyle Larson. But I think it'd be funny if Denny Hamlin won the championship this season.
I'm hoping
Denny can't win a championship.
I would hope so.
It's not. He needs to be the greatest driver of all time, ever won a championship. Of course, outside of Mark Martin. But the point is that I just don't see Denny winning a championship. I guess I'll jump into my final four. I agree with you, Kyle Larson. Let's be honest. I think he's just going to be a flat out favorite, not for the championship, but I think he's going to be a flat out favorite every year from this point on in his career to make a final four. He's definitely solidified himself no matter what gen. Of course, I know we haven't seen a race yet in the new gen, but the point is that he's solidified himself, and no matter what he drives, he's arguably one of the best to do so. You also mentioned as well, Eddie, a point about Kyle Busch, earlier on the show about seeing an urgency and having to, really prove himself this year. I really feel last year's playoff, Kyle Busch, might add, was so close, yet had so many problems last year in the playoffs. And I know it wasn't a win at the LA Coliseum for him, but I am very, very excited and very enjoyed to see how good of a year to start it's been for Kyle Busch, because I'm going to be honest, I've never actually seen him smile so much in my life. And I know it sounds insane, but during the Coliseum, he did nothing but have fun. There was no complaining, no nothing. And I really think with practice being back this year for a lot of tracks, you cannot ignore how good Kyle Busch is once he gets track time. That's been the big killer for him the last 2 years or so. So with that being said, I expect a big push for Kyle Busch. And if I'm being honest, I think he could have another run in the championship this year for Joe Gibbs Racing and prove his worth for Gibbs. Another driver, too, that he was finished one spot behind. I think Joey Logano actually is the driver that leads Penske this year. Of course, Ryan Blaney continues to be on the surge and so on. But, the 22 team every single year after, how do I put it? After going somewhat quiet last year, the second half for Joey Logano, especially through all those terrible road course races, went really, really under the radar and quiet. And then he showed up in the playoffs just like Brad did. I think this year you're going to see a lot more noise from Joey, and especially at these short tracks and so on. And I really think that Logano every year is always a driver that you could talk about competing for the Final Four. It's just a matter of, can he get it done when it matters? And I really think Joey's going to step it up this year. And for the record, too, I think Ford in general, I know last year was a little bit of a disappointment for that program in general, but I really think we could see them really stepping up in the mile-and-a-half program this year, along with Gibbs. So I'm excited to see what they have to bring, but I think you're going to see a Ford representation from Joey Logano. And the last car in the Final Four, it's going to be tough. You mentioned Kurt Busch, Eddie. I think that Kurt's going to make the playoffs. He's going to do well. For the record, too, not a Final Four prediction, but I do see Daniel Suarez make the playoffs this year as well. I think that Trackhouse has looked very, very well, and I think that he's going to step into a good area this year. But, it's tough because I do want to throw another Hendrick card. I'd love to say Chase Elliott, but again, you don't really know. Obviously, Chase has been on the brink. You know what? I'll agree with you. He may be your champion, Eddie, but I think Ryan Blaney will make the Final Four this year. I think it'll do. Penske will have two drivers. I think Martin Truex Jr., for the record, too, he's going to make the playoffs. I think that definitely has potential. Even though he's been underwhelming to start, it feels like that way. I don't think you can count out MTJ, but I really do think Ryan Blaney has a good chance. If he can just get through Richmond and the tracks he's really bad at in the playoffs, he's going to do well. I really think he's going to do well. And I think Penske really needs a championship desperately, but I still think they come short. I know my mom's not going to like I'm going to say this, but my prediction of the champion this year, I think Kyle Busch is going to get it done, and I think he's going to win yet another title. And I think it's well-deserved for someone that's having a historic career. And I really hope he does get his first Daytona 500 win. I just don't know how realistic it is with how bad he's been at plate tracks over the past few years.
Well, we'll see what happens. NASCAR season getting started on Sunday. Drew Jua, thanks so much for joining us today on Sports Speak.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we'll have more to come next week. We'll also have to recap the Super Bowl in another episode and also talk about some NBA news and recap the Daytona 500. But that's all for next week. But that's all for today's show. A reminder, we're available on YouTube and Spotify. You can check it out on both those platforms, and you can follow along me and Tim's NASCAR pick'em throughout the season on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Mort.
And this has been Sports Speak. Let's go Rutgers, and we'll see you next time.